country has to grow into a $5 trillion economy at the rate at which we are aiming at, we need banks which can compete with Citibank and Standard Chartered and Bank of America. We cannot, pygmy banks cannot deal with those giants, so we needed them. Secondly, if you have giant banks, a single giant doesn't help. Of course, State Bank of India is still very, very large, much larger than the next bank. You need some competing banks. So therefore, 5, 6 competing banks have been created, where it will create the momentum, and then they will grow into bigger and bigger banks. So that consolidation part was very necessary. Now the issue is that, of course, public sector banks, the last nationalization took place in 1980. They have been growing, but from 1991 onwards, we have allowed licenses to number of banks. Private banks, many new have entered in. The old private banks have continued to thrive. They are growing bigger. Foreign banks are coming in a big way. They are also thriving. NBFCs became an important component. And NBFCs, including the housing finance companies, they started expanding their business to the extent that the lower rung of the banking system, urban cooperative banks also started playing an important role. So it's not that the private sector did not come up and rise to the occasion to fill in the gap that was created. They did, but the forms were becoming different. Urban cooperatives, as well as new private sector banks that came in and started consolidating, growing. You mentioned about Kotak Mahindra, Yes Bank. Yes. They all came in and they started growing pretty big. ICICI started growing pretty big. Bandhan Bank came in. So they started growing in. So the space is being filled in.
The tragedy is, and I was speaking to somebody just before I came on, is that we have pretty much most of the big Indian banks in London now. They're doing good work in terms of the NRI and PIO communities. Many of them are servicing their Indian clients who are looking at ventures and doing business overseas. But the real thing that they're missing, and again going back to where I come from, where we're constantly talking about opportunities and writing about opportunities for Indian companies and organizations going global, is that none of them have been able to penetrate the global market, the local market. And that for me is the next big frontier. The big frontier for Indian banks is to be able to leverage our cost arbitrage, our technology, our democratic dividend, our demographic dividend in terms of providing banking services globally. I see no other country in the world that has the same mix of talent and capability that India does. But we must come out of our comfort zone.
हम नेशनलाइजेशन के विरोधी हैं। यानी जो बैंकों का राष्ट्रीयकरण उस समय हुआ, उस समय जो दीनदयाल जी ने कहा कि ये गलत स्टेप है, क्योंकि हम इसमें एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप को समाप्त कर रहे हैं। तो हम अपनी विचारधारा के नाते हम एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप के समर्थक हैं, प्राइवेट एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप के समर्थक हैं। इस कमरे में बैठे हुए कुछ लोग ऐसा भी समझते होंगे कि जो देश में वर्तमान में जो सरकार है वो राइटिस्ट सरकार है। तो जब जैसे ही राइट शब्द आता है तो हमारे ध्यान में अमेरिका, इंग्लैंड, यूरोप के दूसरे देश जो बड़े इंडस्ट्री के समर्थक हैं, बड़े कॉरपोरेट के समर्थक हैं, और वो कैपिटलिज्म को राइट के नाते मानते हैं। तो अगर इसको राइट कहते हैं तो वी आर नॉट राइट, हम राइट नहीं हैं वो वाले। मैं इस कमरे में बैठे हुए ख़ास तौर पर कुछ लोगों के ध्यान से ये बात देना चाहता हूँ कि हम लोग छोटे के समर्थक हैं, हम लोग प्राइवेट एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप के समर्थक हैं। मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई जब लाडवा जी बात कर रहे थे कि बैंक बने लेकिन छोटों को तो सर्व करें।
Is that the Indian banks historically have been too small. So there are many indicators as to why we find the Indian banks too small. One is that we had one of the large industrial houses in India in a meeting with the Prime Minister not too long ago, mentioned that they were finding a problem with the 40% limit that banks have to a single industrial house. It just happened to be the ratio that to us did not appear to be an unreasonable ratio. 40% of the assets of a bank being given to a single industrial house is a huge number, and I don't think that's a reasonable amount of risk. So from a directional perspective, one could say that you relax that limit, but it wouldn't make sense. That is too much risk for a single entity to take. So it became quite clear that we needed larger banks. And I think that need was recognized by the Minister of Finance. And there was a move. One of the ways to sort of create that was to consolidate the banks. There are many other ways. You could have just capitalized the best performing banks and had them grow. There were other ways to achieve the same end. But the manner in which that the choice that they made was to start the consolidation. However, where we would say that the banking sector might have consolidated at the top, we would not say that that's happened across all banking, because within the scheduled commercial banks and in that area you might have seen a reduction, but the country still has over 9,000 banks that exist, what you could call cooperatives that exist. You have the regional rural banks where we've done some tremendous work in consolidating them now down to 46. But the overall reach of the banking system is not just the scheduled commercial banks.